Hello guys, you have found me beginning my evening relaxation at 8 p.m. And that's one thing that I've started to learn as I've gotten older is with work, exercising, eating, taking care of a dog, one very crucial part of my life that I find myself running out of time for is playing video games. And I'm sure that's true for people like you too. The fact that there are so many things that come up in our personal lives and so many great video games out there to play that we don't get the chance to play them all. This has of course led to the trend of gamers living vicariously through other gamers to experience different types of video games. With gaming being both an expensive and time-consuming hobby, sometimes we have to experience video games through the lens of our friends telling us about their experiences, or watching content creators on Twitch or YouTube. But I think there's one thing we can all agree on, and that is even when you are vicariously living in the moment, living in the game through someone else, there are still certain aspects of games that you just don't experience until you do them yourself. So with that in mind, let's talk about 7 video gaming experiences where you just had to be there. And since you happen to be here, make sure to hit the like button. Your engagement is massive for the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm and helps other people find this video. You should also comment any other video gaming experiences where you feel that you just had to be there. If you can't think of anything to say, just comment your favorite emoji. It adds towards engagement, which really helps the channel. And while you're at it, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you get notifications for new videos like this. And now let's get on with the list. Now for people my age, this first entry is going to be something that you quite literally had to be there for, which is your first trade evolution in a Pokemon game. Now it's possible that my younger audience's first Pokemon experiences were on the Nintendo DS with Wi-Fi and the ability to trade with someone anywhere in the world at any given time. But, and I hate to say this, back in my day, you actually had to be there with a link cable in hand and an actual friend if you wanted to trade a Pokemon. Now, but once again, we're not talking about just any sort of trade. We are talking about specifically a trade evolution. And there's a reason that this stands out as an extremely memorable moment where you had to be there. This is because back in the day when you had to hook up a link cable between 2 Game Boys. This was back when the internet was in its infancy. Information about video games was not everywhere that you could consume on a second's notice. So what was important is that the knowledge of what Pokemon evolved from a trade was not necessarily widely known. I remember as a kid, I knew that Haunter evolved into Gengar via trade. So I hooked up my trade cable with one of my friends and I traded them my Haunter and he was like, oh, guess I'm gonna keep this now. However, unknown to him, he traded me a Graveler, which then evolved into a Golem because we didn't know that was going to happen. And while Gengar is, I think, unquestionably a better Pokemon, because this was something that neither of us saw coming, he immediately was like, no, I take it back, give me my Golem. It's the excitement of the evolution, but also the experience of learning about something just on the spot, finding out something that you had no idea existed, and then getting to share that experience with your friends was one of those classic moments that you just can't get from watching a stream or a YouTube video. So for me, that ranks in one of my top 10 you had to be there moments in video gaming. Now, entry number 2 is something that has scarred me potentially for life. And it truly is an experience that you just can't really understand until you have experienced it yourself. And that is going to be playing a horror game in virtual reality. I don't think it matters how well or not well you handle horror games, horror movies, or really just the horror genre in general. No matter how many times you've played Outlast 2 or watched The Shining, nothing really prepares you for that experience of a jump scare or a horrific scenario in virtual reality. I think I've talked about it on the channel where I bought Resident Evil 7 Biohazard for PlayStation VR, and I think I made it about 15 minutes into the game before I noped and I just had to, the headset had to come off. And VR has a way of making things that are not even supposed to be terrifying, actually terrifying. And that's not something you would understand until you've actually experienced it yourself. For instance, I've poured hundreds of hours into Skyrim. And I've never particularly thought that any enemy in Skyrim was abundantly scary. I mean, Skyrim is not a horror game. And I don't call myself an arachnophobe, but have you seen a giant frostbite spider in Skyrim VR? You truly don't get a sense of the scale of a giant frostbite spider until you just come up like halfway up one's leg and you're just looking up this mountain of a spider just looking down on you. absolutely horrific. I also remember playing Here They Lie in VR, which is supposed to be kind of a psychological horror game. But I just remember there's one scene where I looked over the edge of a balcony and you see just this bottomless chasm below you. And I've never really thought I was afraid of heights until I experienced this and the level of vertigo and just sheer terror for the ability of falling that I actually fell down onto the floor and thought I was going to fall. It was an experience that I can't explain in words, and I can't do justice until you experience it yourself. Now, entry number 3 is one that tentatively could come off this list, I will be honest. But I think when you're there for this, physically and not just watching, it just means something more to you. It's an experience you can get from watching, but when you're there, it's just more impactful. And that's going to be experiencing some sort of massive plot twist in a video game. I know most of the people watching this video are fans of KOTOR, and I don't think that you can appreciate the plot twist where your player character is actually Darth Revan until you've played through the game, made friends of all of your allies and companions, and then found out that you are playing as the guy that tried to, and maybe did in the end, kill them all. Or experiencing Photoshop Flowey at the end of Undertale. Like, I don't know about you, I didn't expect Flowey to be the final boss, but I super didn't expect Photoshop Flowey to be the final boss. Finishing that game at 2 a.m. and being sleep deprived made for a massive plot twist that I just don't think I would have gotten if I had watched a gameplay of the game. And I don't know about you guys, but playing Red Dead Redemption 2, when Arthur Morgan was diagnosed with TB, I don't know if you guys saw that coming. I sure didn't. And I just felt a massive pit in my stomach whenever this protagonist that I have developed such a great relationship over the course of the entire game, just that plot twist just on a dime, just flipping his entire world. I don't think I could have gotten the same amount of emotional attachment and been affected in that way had I just watched gameplay. I definitely had to be there for that one. Now for entry number 4, Arthur Morgan is actually a perfect segue into our next entry, which is going to be experiencing the death of a major character. Now, obviously, there are going to be massive spoilers for several video games in this section, so I will put a timestamp down below in the description so that you can skip over this one if you don't want to see any video game spoilers. Also put a list of the games down in the description below, so that if you play the game, you don't have to skip over the section. Now, there's no doubt you can form an emotional connection with a character while watching gameplay. There are plenty of YouTube videos where there are people that make a living just watching other people play and then having emotional responses to those characters dying or different endings occurring. But I don't think that you can replace that bond that you make with these characters that you've played with an entire game only to lose them. I made a video on this topic several months ago about character deaths that were just not over. I mean, Mordin Solus from Mass Effect 3. He taught us about the birds and the bees in Mass Effect 2. We sang songs together. He was there for us every step of the way, and to lose him was a crushing blow. Or in Final Fantasy VII, whenever Cloud lost Aerith. I think that has to be considered one of the biggest video game character deaths in all of gaming. And I think this makes my point because I haven't played the original Final Fantasy VII. I'm aware that Aerith dies. I've seen the scene with Aerith dying, and I've forged a relationship with Aerith in Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I haven't experienced Aerith dying in Final Fantasy VII Remake yet, if that does happen. And just from hearing other people talk about Aerith's death, I know that I cannot empathize with them on that same level. Another major one would be Louis Finch's death from What Remains of Edith Finch. I had seen gameplay where you're sailing the boat and I saw the guillotine, but until you're there in the moment, playing and experiencing the overwhelmingly emotional story of What Remains of Edith Finch, you can't appreciate that death unless you're there for yourself. So in my opinion, nothing can replace the feeling of loss when you lose a massive character than if you're actually there. Now, on a lighter note, entry number 5 might be one that's not as relatable now. Again, going back to entry number 1, now that the internet is so widely available and all of these things are there at the click of a button, it's hard to understand the feeling of back whenever everything wasn't super Googleable, when you figured out a massively hard puzzle in a video game. That was a feeling like no other. Because you couldn't just go online and search for a solution because those things weren't widely available. You either called one of your friends on your landline or you had to figure it out on your own. And if you're a gamer now that just loves puzzles, you know that level of satisfaction whenever you figure it out. And when you're watching a game online, you start to see them start to figure it out and then you see it and then it's not the same. There's not the level of pressure when you're doing it yourself. For example, if you're fighting Psycho Mantis in Metal Gear Solid 1, you had to feel so clever when you figured out that you had to unplug the controller from controller port 1 and plug the controller into controller port 2 in order to win the battle. Or in Metal Gear Solid, whenever you have to find Meryl's codec number, and you were told it's on the back of the CD, and you search around aimlessly in the game to find the CD key, when all along it was on the back of your actual physical, in real life case. Like, there's nothing that replaces those moments of eureka or that euphoria that you feel when you finally figured out that puzzle. Or hell, the goat puzzle from Broken Sword. Anyone who figured out on their own the way to get around the goat was to let it hit you and then move the cart so it got tangled on it, my hat is off to you. You are brilliant. But figuring out a puzzle like these is something where if you're there for it, it just means something special. Now, for our penultimate entry, I don't think that I have to convince anyone here that this is something where you had to be there. And that is going to be whenever you're defeating some sort of epic boss. Now, the word boss can take multiple forms. Of course, when we think of boss, our mind immediately goes to something like a Soulsborne game. I know a moment that I will never forget was whenever I took down Vort of the Boreal Valley, a boss who's not actually that hard, but that was my first ever Dark Souls or Soulsborne boss. And I've watched playthroughs of people beat Vort, but it's just, there's something about whenever you do it yourself, that level of satisfaction, your euphoria and adrenaline levels are high, and it just goes through the roof whenever you actually deliver that killing blow. But if you watched my video about the stages of epic boss battles, bosses can be more than just Soulsborne bosses. I mean, look at Stormy Ascent from Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. Certainly not a person per se, but to beat Stormy Ascent in Crash Bandicoot is definitely a top tier moment in my gaming career. And you know it's one of those things where you had to be there because when you watch someone doing it, you see them taking swings at the boss when they shouldn't. I remember when I was fighting the Tree Sentinel, there were people in the chat saying, you look like you're attacking at times where you really shouldn't. But when you're in the moment, those things aren't clear. Or when I did my stream of beating Stormy Ascent, people would say, how are you not seeing this timing? It's very clear to me. And you know, they thought that the jumps were super easy. And honestly, when I watched PlayStation Access try to beat Stormy Ascent in just 50 lives, under the influence of hot chilies, I'll put a link in the top right corner. It's not even my video, but you should go watch it because it's phenomenal. I thought Stormy Ascent looked so easy, and that's why I had to give it a try. And then I learned how super not easy it is. But I don't think anything will top the feeling that I felt when I got the Platinum Relic on Stormy Ascent. I watched videos of people doing it and I was impressed and I saw them get better times than me, but to actually do it when I was actually there, it is just a feeling that there is no comparison to. For our final entry, we have finding an Easter egg inside of a video game. Now, if there's one thing that gamers love, it's a good Easter egg. Hell, Easter eggs are so popular in video gaming culture that they made an entire movie about them in Ready Player One. Which, by the way, was one of the most unrealistic movies in the world, not for the virtual reality portion or all of the haptic controls that are very futuristic. But the idea that an Easter egg stayed hidden in a video game for like, what, 5 years? Come on, if there's one thing that we know about gaming culture, it's that gamers will find your Easter egg almost immediately, especially when the solution is to just drive backwards, or something to do with Latin if you read the books. But then we can appreciate an Easter egg whenever we read about it, or we look at an article about Easter eggs in video games, or when we watch a stream and we see one. But when you actually discover that Easter egg, that's something that it hits different. Recently, I played an early access demo of the House Flipper 2 game, and I was going around building my house, and I found that the developers put in a Dark Brotherhood sanctuary door in a storm shelter. And if you went through it, it led to this secret little D&D room. Like, that was so cool, and that was one of my favorite Easter eggs that I've seen recently in a video game. Or I remember back when I was playing Fallout 4 and I encountered the Prost, or the Cheers bar from the TV show Cheers. It helps that Cheers is one of my favorite sitcoms of all time, but that was an awesome moment to like experience that, nerd out, and see all of the different characters like Norm and Cliff, their skeletons sitting at the bar. Or if you were smart enough in Batman Arkham Asylum to break open the wall in the warden's office and discover the blueprints for the upcoming sequel of Arkham City. Like, you can appreciate these things, but until you were actually there, it just doesn't hit the same. All right, guys, so that'll do it for this list. 7 video gaming experiences where you really just had to be there. Do you have any great had to be there experiences? Let me know down in the comments. Did any of them pertain to ones in this list, or were they something completely different where you had to be there? Let me know, or if you don't have anything to say or any experiences to share, just drop your favorite emoji. Again, your engagement is a massive help for the channel. While we're talking about engagement, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and the notification bell so you get notifications for new videos like this. We'll see you guys in a later video. Thanks for watching.